Good morning and welcome to At the Open Gate and our Talent Treasures feature. This is our opportunity to interview and speak with our friends who have taken the Clifton Strengths about some of their top strengths. And joining me today is Scott Morley, Senior Leadership Advisor with Azimuth Consulting Group and a good friend. And Scott's top talent is woo. So I'm looking forward to that. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so just before we get going, I'll give a little background on the Clifton Strengths for folks that haven't taken it before. It's a wonderful tool that basically summarizes all of your talent themes and gives you an opportunity to learn about your strengths and how to apply them in your daily life and work and with others. And these are naturally things that we're naturally inclined to and ways that we think and things that we use every day. And woo, Scott's number one talent, stands for winning others over. And so people that are really talented in this theme are really drawn to strangers, seem to never have met a person they don't like, and don't shy away from fresh conversations. So, Scott, does that sound like you a little bit?
That pretty much covers it. It's a pretty good start.
Yeah. Has that been something you've been aware of or, most of your life, or were you surprised when you saw your Clifton Strengths for the first time?
If I'm going to be honest, I think that's something that matured and developed over time. I think
Yeah,
I was actually a pretty shy kid growing up,
really.
and only into end of high school and college, early 20s, did I really kind of start coming out of my shell a little bit.
Wow.
Um, and then having developed that talent into a strength, um, I think I got to use it a lot more in the latter half of my military career, even more.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I really got to hone it and exercise it, that muscle, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. When I was thinking about that, yeah, because you have had a, 20 plus year career in the military, in the Army Special Forces, and, you've done tours over the world, and Um, it's such a different environment. How has Woo played out for you in that environment?
Yeah. So the statistic, as you get ready to retire, they pull every deployment, every training cycle, and the for me the stat was I spent a little bit over 6 years working in foreign cultures in some form or fashion.
Mhm.
3 combat deployments, 2 to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan, and then my family and I lived overseas for about 4 years in Latin America.
Mhm.
Um, I, you said Army Special Forces, so for those unfamiliar with that parlance, I was a Green Beret,
Yeah.
um, and part of our modus operandi, if you will, as Green Berets is you have to win over hearts and minds in order to get the job
Mhm.
accomplished. And
Mhm.
so I got to use Woo a lot in that realm of being a Green Beret, either in combat or working in embassies for 4 years in Latin America, not just with foreign partners, but also U.S. partners. When you're
Mhm.
working in an interagency environment, there's no clear chain of command, and everyone's working from slightly different lists of priorities. And so you
Mhm.
have to create a lot of win-wins to get your priorities at the top of everyone's collective list.
Yeah.
Um, and so I got to use Woo a lot, and
Yeah.
leveraged it a lot for the better part of at least 6 years working in foreign cultures and foreign countries. But um,
Yeah.
public speaking, I mean, I could go on.
Yeah. So yeah, just many layers to it. And I think about when you say that, I think about so many people, and I would venture to say probably the majority find being in social situations, new social situations, to almost be a source of anxiety, right? A lot of people feel really uncomfortable that first trying to meet people. So what's it like for you inside when you're like, okay, I got this new group of people, and what are you feeling? What are you thinking?
I guess excited.
Yeah.
When I think of the Clifton strengths, I think sources of energy. So
Yeah.
the higher the strength is on your list, the more
Mhm.
energy or excitement you get by leveraging that strength.
Mhm.
Um, So for me, woo, like meeting new people, I just find human beings interesting.
Yeah.
And so, meeting someone new or meeting a group of people, I enjoy the learning about the other, the other person, the audience, the group of people, whoever that other is, that
Mhm.
foreign culture. I just like learning about it, and
Mhm.
I guess I find human beings interesting, like I said. So I try to ask a lot of questions and just absorb what I'm hearing, listening, smelling,
Yeah.
touching in that foreign culture.
Yeah, getting the whole picture. And it's funny, you make me think about one of the things that I promote a lot to leaders is cultivating your sense of curiosity. And I will often say curiosity can be your superpower if you really, and it seems like you have that just natural desire to know and understand. And the curiosity is what came out of what you just said for me. Uh,
Yeah,
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 yeah.
I totally agree. Like a lot of good leadership comes largely, I believe, from active listening, and you can't
Mhm.
really be an active listener if you're not curious. So
Right.
I agree with you.
100%. So do you find, Scott, that other people notice this talent in you? And if so, how do you get feedback on that?
Um, I think my wife would say that she's noticed, over years of marriage, like I'm good in front of a crowd. Like
Mhm.
I'm good in front of a crowd. I don't mind. At first, I was super nervous doing any sort of public speaking event, but
Mhm.
I got to the point where I found it really really exciting.
Mhm.
Um, I get energy from it, and so public speaking, giving presentations, giving workshops. Um, I enjoy it. B, the feedback, at least thus far. We'll see what those listening to this interview would say, but for the most part, I've gotten positive feedback on how I do publicly,
Yeah.
and so I've learned. Well, okay, if I'm good at it, let's find ways to do it more.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And and it's an interesting contrast because I'm high in relator, which is, and we'll talk in a few minutes about the contrast between those two. And when I do public speaking, maybe not as easy for me as someone like yourself, but I enjoy it as well. And I find myself really trying to connect with each individual in the audience, and that's what kind of helps calm me down. Is I feel like, oh, I'm just having a conversation with individuals. Does that play out for you as someone with Woo? I mean, do you find you're looking at the audience that way?
I look at the group and I'm looking for as many head nods or as like
Mhm.
you, I look for the body language to see
Yeah,
if what I'm saying is actually connecting. Like if they're if
right,
they're leaning forward,
right,
or if I'm getting head nods, or if I'm seeing notes being taken, I'm like, all right, this like I feel good. I feel like what I'm saying is resonating.
right.
Conversely, if people are arms crossed or they're starting to check their phones,
Yeah.
that's a loss for me. So I try to get as few phones and as many eyeballs as I can
Right,
in
right.
those scenarios.
Trying to pivot. So how do you find yourself pivoting then if you do see people losing interest? What's your
Uh,
strategy then?
I like calling on people,
Mhm.
even in virtual worlds.
Mhm.
I try to make in any sort of presentation or workshop that I'm doing virtually nowadays, since the pandemic, particularly,
Right, right.
um, that if I don't see them with their camera on, I'll ask them to put their camera on. So it
Mm,
becomes a two-way dialogue.
yeah.
Um, so cameras on, and whether it's virtual or in person, I'll call on people just to
Mhm.
keep people on their toes.
Yeah.
Hey, Nancy, what do you think about that? Right?
Yeah.
Like, if I
Yeah.
see Nancy starting to drift,
Right.
um, I find that it like the teaching style almost like
Yeah.
that pedagogy of
Right.
presentation. I find fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and a fun fact, I'm thinking back to when you and I first met, which was at our Clifton Strengths certification seminar in an environment very much like this, where we were online. And I think that was one of the first things I thought about you, is just number one, he's good people. I mean, immediately I knew you were someone I could just trust and feel comfortable with, but it was your energy too that you brought to the, that energy is real evident, I think, that just kind of exudes from you. So that's a lot
Oh,
of
thank
fun
you.
to
And
be
that feeling
around.
is mutual.
Yeah, yeah. So what about when you're faced with a difficult challenge of some sort, maybe a work-related challenge, and nowadays you're doing, leadership consulting and development for others, so helping others to grow in their leadership skills. Let's say you're faced with a difficult challenge at work. How do you tap into your woo, maybe, to solve it?
I think towards your earlier point, um, being curious about the other party.
Yeah.
So if it's, at the end, I am a believer that most conflict stems from a mismatch of expectations.
Hmm.
Uh, Party one expected A, B, C, D, and party two expected E, F, G, H.
Right.
And when there's a mismatch, that's when conflict happens. So the degree to which you can align expectations tends to, not always, tends to alleviate conflict and increase the health of the norms and therefore the group performance.
Right.
So I think to your question, if there's a different challenge, how can I can use woo? It's getting back to that intellectual curiosity about the other person or the other party, if a group or individual, their perspective and what they think success looks like, or their vision of what they're trying to achieve, and
Hmm.
actively questioning and listening on what that mental model looks like in their mind's eye. Um, I think that's how I can help use woo to resolve conflict or overcome challenges professionally, personally.
Yeah.
The more curious I can get, the more I can understand what they're aiming for, and then look for some sort of win-win where or compromise where we can both get
Yeah.
closer to success, move the needle a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed you said, win-win a couple times, and I think that's a really fascinating strategy too, right? Again, you're looking for not just self, but that everybody gets a win out of this situation, which is real, I think, generous and genuine. So that's a cool aspect of it as well. So,
Book plug, Getting More by Stuart Diamond. He's
good to
a
know.
negotiation professor at Wharton School at UPenn, and
Okay,
it was required reading before we all went to Afghanistan in 2013.
really
And it's remains I think one of the really good books on how to create win-win, largely through active listening and being curious about the other person
awesome.
rather
Getting
than
more
only going for the binary you
right,
win, I lose
right. Negotiation.
scenarios.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Great, great. Thank you. Well, and as you well know, Scott, the one aspect of these talent themes is that they're neutral in nature. In other words, we can take our talents and build them into strengths and utilize them in ways that are productive and helpful. Sometimes if we misapply them or overuse them, our talents can also get in our way. So, do you find that your talent for woo ever gets in your way at all?
Yeah, if I'm being honest,
Yeah.
I think woo for those unindoctrinated to the Clifton Strengths way of thinking, they also work in alchemy with one another. So if you have a
Mhm.
combination, different layers to the strengths coming out. So for me,
Right.
woo plus responsibility, uh, loyalty, commitment comes from the responsibility, and then the woo, towards your point earlier, a breadth of people. So when I'm trying to be loyal to a breadth of people, the
Uh-huh.
combination becomes I have a hard time saying no. So
Yeah.
that's how woo gets in my way sometimes, is
Yeah.
drawing boundaries and saying no to people.
Mhm.
Because my tendency and my nature is to always say yes. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll figure out
I'm
how to
here.
help.
Yeah. And how have you managed to navigate that, or how have you managed to be successful at drawing boundaries?
Um, I think, and this is how I coach some of my clients nowadays too, is taking a moment to gain perspective on yourself and starting with a written and enumerated list of priorities.
Mhm.
And if you're super duper clear on what's important to you and why that thing is important to you, and that this is it can be personal, it can be professional.
Right.
I'm a fan of a mismatch of both. Um, Sleep, hygiene, you know, physical health, mental health, etc. So, where are each of those in relative priority to one another? Once you get really, really clear on what your priorities are and are not, then it's a lot easier to, for me at least, draw boundaries on where I'm allocating my time and my energy. If
Mhm.
it's, and then I go into Eisenhower's matrix. If it's
Mhm.
important and it's urgent, I do it. If
Yeah.
it's important but it's not necessarily urgent, I'll schedule it and I'll put it on a rhythm for myself. And if it's not important, it's a lot easier to say no
Yeah.
if I'm really clear on what truly is important.
Yeah. Oh, that is so awesome. And it's really about just doing that deep reflective work that is so hard, I think, for so many folks to prioritize even just doing that. But
Yeah.
as you say, once you've done that, then you get dividends for being able to make better choices and boundaries. So
Yep.
yeah.
In the military, we use something, the military decision making process, and part of that is evaluating different courses of action, different battle plans,
Yeah.
in simple terms. And as you're evaluating different options, we would pre-develop evaluation criteria. And for me, being hyper clear on what your priorities are become the evaluation criteria for different options in your life. Should I move? Should I take another job? Should I whatever?
Right.
Where is saving for retirement
Right.
or spending on a big trip now? Like where do those different options fall and against your list of what's important? And then
Right.
decisions get real easy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, what do you find you need from a manager or supervisor to help you succeed, to help your woo succeed?
Uh Opportunity to be the mouthpiece, I think, is
Ah,
fun.
yeah.
So, in some instances, I had a very introverted supervisor,
Mhm.
and those who would leverage me would get me in front of the audience, get me in, let me get out there with my top hat and my cane and in front of the
Do the
three ring
vaudeville.
circus, and yeah, and do my thing. Because I think it's fun. Other people would, shy away from that. And
Right.
because of my woo strength, I think I get a lot of energy from it. I mean, my heart rate's through the roof. It's not
Right.
like it's super easy.
Right.
But it's at the afterwards, I'm like, oh, that was super fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Oh,
think, those bosses and those supervisors that I've had over the years who have recognized that and put me in a place to leverage it, it's
yeah.
win-win.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. It's almost like the after effect for you that, oh, this was so fun, this was so great, is what drives you to get through the pain. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Kinda I get that feeling myself, and I'm not high in woo, but that's kinda what helps get me through speaking events. It's like, "Oh, that was fun." Like, but all the prep getting up there was not so fun.
It hurts a little bit. Yeah. Or I mean, you can even use it the opposite. So if you've done something kind of begrudgingly and it kind of starts draining your energy, then go put it on your calendar and go schedule something where you can leverage some of your top strengths. In
Yeah,
my case, woo, right? In your case, relator. But
right.
do something that refills your body battery a little bit.
Yeah,
Um, and you can kind of schedule your days that way to keep yourself on plane.
really good advice. I like that. Yeah, scheduling around your strengths. That's a really good advice. So, I'm gonna steal that. That's a good one.
Not original material. Go ahead.
Well, we like to contrast, and I mentioned earlier that one of the contrasting themes to woo, and there's similarities as well, is woo and relator. And so I'm going to give you two statements and just see how you react to them. So woo, the statement is I can build a broad social network, and relator is I like to build a deep social network. So how do those two sound to you? And That's
Accurate, I think, is the first adjective that comes to
really,
mind. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I know that I could call on any number of people. I'm very fortunate to have a large and reliable set of friends in my
Mhm.
network that if I needed help, I know I could call dozens of people, and
Right,
and vice versa. If they could call me, and
right.
I'd be there to help. Um, Relator, I think. Well, you tell us, but Relator, I think it's a smaller, but it's a deeper
Right,
pool
right.
of those social networks and those social relationships.
Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah. And not that you don't necessarily want to invest in a broad network, but it's just that you get more energy, like you said in the beginning, more energy from that smaller network. Yeah,
Yeah.
and spending time with that. Yeah. Well, Scott, what would be some words of encouragement you might want to leave other people with this incredible talent for Woo, which our world needs?
Well, I think it's whether it's woo or relator or learner or whatever. Um, and I think Gallup and Don Clifton, the founder, would agree. Lean into it.
Yeah,
Don't don't try to correct or supplement or develop or improve any of your lesser strengths. We are all grown adults. It is an inefficient use of time and energy to try to get better at things we're not necessarily good at naturally. Instead, focus on what you're good at, set the conditions and the events and the schedule in your life that allows
yeah,
you to leverage what you're actually good at, be your best self more often. And then for things that you're not necessarily good at, find a partner, find a peer, partner with a supervisor, delegate to, someone on your team who is good and gets energy from the things that you don't really want to be doing, and offer your services for the things that you're really, really good at. Again, I said this before, but create win-win scenarios in that regard.
yeah,
Simply
yeah.
like lean into what you're good at, delegate, partner, get that crap off your plate that you're not naturally good at and you're not energized by, and life just gets a lot happier, a lot faster that way.
100%. Oh, great advice. Wow. Yeah. Thanks for that summary. And Scott, thank you so much for taking your time. This was really insightful, and I always appreciate talking with you. So, looking forward to sharing this with others. So, thanks again, Scott.
Thanks again for having me, Nancy. Anytime.